The co-main event of UFC 327 features one of the most fascinating stylistic matchups in the flyweight division. Not even just flyweight division, I would say in the UFC in general. On one side, you have Joshua Van, a fast rising striker with elite boxing and composure that's honestly just insane for his age. And on the other side, you have Tatsuro Taira, a grappling specialist who has built his career around control, positional dominance, and dangerous back takes. At first glance, this might seem like, just any regular old striker versus grappler, but when you dig deeper, the dynamics of this matchup are much more complex. Joshua Van's rise in the flyweight division has been predominantly fueled by his sharp boxing fundamentals, his quick hands, and his impressive composure under pressure. A lot of people like to label him as a high volume striker, but I personally feel like that label doesn't fully capture how he actually fights. Joshua Van is very much capable of throwing in volume, don't get me wrong, but he's also shown the ability to fight patiently and strategically when facing dangerous opponents. A perfect example of this came in his fight with Brandon Royval, where Van didn't rush forward recklessly, but instead he spent the early portions of the first round reading reactions, probing with the jab, and just carefully measuring the distance. And I think that patience is important in a matchup against a grappler like Taira, because the moment you overcommit to strikes, you run the risk of giving up your hips and just being taken down or getting in clinch situations. And I think Van has shown that he understands this dynamic and he's willing to slow the pace down early. And I think the same game plan he took, well, being more calculated and more patient, like we seen in that first round versus Royval, can also be applied to avoid giving grapplers easy opportunities for takedowns. In all honesty, it also wouldn't surprise me if we see him follow the same game plan that Royval took against Taira and just create scrambles, defend takedowns, and get back to the feet quickly and just put pressure on Taira. I just think technically Van just holds several advantages on the feet against Taira. He's faster, he has more pocket awareness, and he just has more experience winning striking exchanges. When you go back and watch that fight with Taira and Brandon Royval, when the fight was on the ground, Taira didn't really have much to offer for Royval. And I think if this fight stays standing for extended periods of time, I think Van is going to he's going to control the striking exchanges. That's no doubt. That's no doubt. He's going to accumulate damage because I just think the gap between them striking wise is very, very significant. While Joshua Van represents the striking side of the matchup, Tatsuro Taira represents the grappling threat. Tatsuro Taira has built his reputation as one of the most dangerous grapplers in all of flyweight. His strength don't come from overwhelming opponents with constant takedown attempts like a pressure wrestler. Instead, he relies on patience and timing, looking for the right moment to initiate his grappling exchanges. This is important. This is a very important distinction, actually, because I'm seeing people getting Taira's grappling extremely wrong. I'm seeing people saying, oh, he's just going to go in there and he's just going to spam takedowns. I don't think Taira does that. I don't think he goes in this fight and shoots immediately on Joshua Van. He's not really a pressure wrestler, like I said. He's not a Khabib, Marab. He doesn't win through relentless takedown pressures and cardio. Taira's approach is way different. His game is built around securing one clean entry, advancing position, and eventually taking the bag. And once Taira gets that bag, man, I ain't gonna lie, man, he becomes extremely dangerous. His grappling system revolves around body lock entries, trips and positional transitions, methodical control, bag takes leading to submission opportunities. And I just don't think he necessarily needs multiple takedowns to win a fight. In many cases, a single successful grappling sequence can completely shift the momentum of the fight or just straight up end the fight. The most useful fights to analyze when looking at this matchup is Taira's fight against Brandon Royval. Because, like I said earlier, Brandon Royval was able to create scrambles, defend takedown attempts, and quickly return to his feet when the fight hit the ground. It was only two instances, and I think it was the second and the fourth round, I believe, where he got controlled for an extended period of time. But his chaotic style disrupted Taira's slower and more methodical grappling approach. And this could be relevant to this matchup because, like I said, Joshua Van has shown the ability to remain calm in chaotic exchanges, but he also could be the one starting those chaotic exchanges. And if he can replicate Royval's success in scrambling back to his feet, it could significantly reduce Taira's opportunities to control the fight. And I think a fight like this fight, if he fights like that, could look a lot. It could honestly look a lot like that third round versus in Taira versus Royval. When you look at this fight stylistically, it could become clear that this fight could realistically be decided by a few key variables. There are certain questions in this fight that we simply do not have the full answer to yet. And those questions are what I like to consider X factors. These are the things that could ultimately determine who wins this fight. Let's start with the X factors for Joshua Van. First X factor I have for Joshua Van is how he handles the grappling if this fight does hit the ground. Up until this point, Van hasn't really been forced to spend prolonged time defending high level grappling threats on the ground. And I'm not saying that necessarily means he can't handle it because he has shown flashes and he has an 81% takedown defense, but he has yet to go into a fight against a grappler like Taira, who's looking to submit you. If we don't count the Pantoja fight, he has not. This is going to be his first time facing a very dangerous grappler like this. So the first question becomes, can Joshua Van scramble back to his feet if he does get taken down? At flyweight, scrambles are everything. Fighters rarely just accept bottom positions for long periods of time, and we saw this very clearly in Brandon Royval's fight against Taturo Taira. In their fight, Brandon Royval was able to create chaotic scrambling situations and repeatedly work his way back up to his feet, which honestly just disturbed Taira's preferred grappling rhythm. Like I said, he likes to fight more methodical and slow pace, so being in there with a guy like Brandon Royval, who's just gonna he's throwing and throwing and throwing. He doesn't spend a single second not throwing the jab. He's active. He's a very active fighter that messes with a guy like Taira, who, like I said, is more methodical. And I think if Joshua Van can do something similar, creating scrambles, fighting hands, exploding back to his feet, then it becomes much harder for Taira to establish the type of control that he wants. And that leads me to my second question. If Van doesn't get back up immediately, can he limit the submission threats? Because with the grappler like Taira, the danger always isn't the takedown itself. It's more so what happens after the takedown. Taira is extremely good at advancing positions and extremely good at finding the back. That's his favorite thing to do is get the back and go for RNC. And once he's on the back, he becomes very, very dangerous with submissions. Van's composure in these moments will be extremely critical. Does he stay calm, defend properly, and work his way back up? Or does he panic and expose his neck or give up his back during a scramble? Those really small moments can completely change the outcome of a fight like this. And the next X factor I got for Joshua Van is his range control. Can Joshua Van control the range early? Van's striking advantage comes from his ability to manage distance with the jab and control exchanges and just pick his shots. If he can keep this fight standing and at his preferred range, Taira will be forced to repeatedly, time and time again, he's going to have to close the distance against a better and faster striker, and that's just a risky game. And that leads me to the next question. Can Van make Taira pay for takedown entries? Defending takedowns is good, but the best strikers don't just defend them, they punish them. If Van starts landing those uppercuts, knees up the middle to the body, or countering every time Taira tries to attempt a takedown, tries to even enter for a takedown, I think that can discourage those attempts as the fight goes on, and he's going to have no choice but to stay standing. Once a grappler starts hesitating on entry, the striker begins to gain control of the pace and the rhythm of the fight. And if Van is able to establish that control, the fight becomes more and more leaning towards him because it's a striking battle at that point. And like I said, I don't think he couldn't keep up with Brandon Royval. And I know Brandon Royval is like mini Nate Diaz. He's just out there throwing shit. But, you know, I think a more calculated Josh Van, his boxing is just too good to have a stand-up fight with. You can't have a stand-up fight with Joshua Van and expect to win that, especially if you're a guy like Tatsuro Taira who doesn't have the best boxing, the best kickboxing. you're looking for that takedown. So I think if Van starts punishing him with those knees, with those uppercuts, and like I said, makes him second guess and hesitate going for those entries, I think that's a very dangerous place to be if you're Tatsuro Taira. Now for the other side, the X factors for Tatsuro Taira revolve around whether he can successfully implement his grappling game before the striking becomes too much and it just begins to take over the whole fight. First question I have for Tatsuro Taira is, can he get a takedown early, or will he be forced to strike longer than he wants? Because if Joshua Van is able to manage distance and keep the fight standing, Taira might have to spend more time striking with Van than he's comfortable with. And that's not necessarily where he wants to be in this matchup, because that's like I said earlier, this is a very dangerous game to play, and I don't think anybody in flyweight really has the boxing that Joshua Van has, and especially like I said, not Taira. I don't think his boxing is good enough to have a stand-up fight. I think he shot, I think it was 16 times. I know he likes to fight a little slower and more methodical, but he has to really pick those shots smartly against Van. Because if he doesn't start getting them and he gets discouraged and he has to stand up with Van, that's not going to be pretty. Range management is just as important to Taira as I mentioned it was for Van. That leads me to my next question. Can Tatsuro Taira stop Van from controlling the distance with the jab? Joshua Van's jab is one of his most important and most powerful tools. If Taira can't consistently get past that jab and close the distance, it's going to become very difficult for him to initiate those grappling exchanges. So Taira needs to find ways to close that distance safely, whether that's through feints, clinch entries, or well-timed level changes. The next X factor I have is what happens once the fight actually hits the ground. Can Taira control Van if he does get the takedown? Because getting a takedown is one thing, but keeping a flyweight down is another. If Van is able to scramble immediately and get back to his feet, then Taira might end up, spending a lot of energy chasing control. And like I said, spending a lot of time on the feet where he might not be as comfortable. But if Taira can secure the position, slow the fight down, and start advancing positions, that's when his grappling becomes extremely dangerous. And finally, for the last major X factor I got for Taira is the striking exchanges. Can he survive extended striking exchanges against Van's pace and pressure? Because if the fight starts turning into longer striking exchanges, I think that's very obvious to me and you. That's where Van's advantages are going to begin to show. I mean, Van is the faster boxer. He throws sharper combinations, and he has the ability to maintain a high pace over multiple rounds. We've seen that in that Brandon Royval fight. I mean, he started off, he threw like 70, high 70s in the first round. Round 2 and 3, he threw like 120, 130. And I think against a guy that's not going to be throwing as much as Brandon Royval was, he can up that. So I think if Taira can't consistently force grappling exchanges, he might be forced into a striking battle, and that's a very difficult fight for him to win, as I previously stated. Another element I don't really see people talking about a lot heading into this fight is Joshua Van's preparation over the past 11 to 10 months. Pantoja, the Pantoja fight, he spent the whole camp training for Pantoja. That camp likely started in July, and he fought Pantoja in December. And Pantoja is one of the most aggressive grapplers in the flyweight division, probably ever. And preparing for someone like Pantoja requires an enormous, insane amount of focus on grappling defense, because that's what he's going in there to do. We're talking about takedown defense drills, scramble scenarios, submission defense, and just surviving chaotic grappling exchanges. But the most interesting part is that the actual fight with Pantoja, as you and me may know, ended in just 26 seconds due to that unfortunate injury. But for Van, it means he went through an entire training camp preparing for the division's most dangerous grappler and barely had to use any of that preparation. Not even barely, he didn't use any of that preparation inside of the cage. Now he enters another training camp for Tatsuro Taira, another high-level grappler. So when you really look at the timeline, Van has essentially spent the better part of the last 10 months preparing for grapplers. That kind of focus on defensive grappling can make a huge difference in a matchup like this. And it doesn't guarantee that Van will completely shut down Taira's grappling, but it does suggest that he may be far more prepared than for these situations than people might like to give him credit for and might expect. Putting all these factors together, this fight really just comes down to what you believe as a fan when answering this one central question. Can Tatsuro Taira consistently impose his grappling before Joshua Van's striking begins to take over this fight? It all comes down to what you believe is going to happen. If Taira is able to secure early takedowns, control positions, fight his fight, find back takes, then he can absolutely win this fight. But if Van is able to defend those entries, scramble back to his feet, and force extended striking exchanges, I think the fight is going to, heavily tilt in his favor. And like I said earlier, Van is just more, just better on the feet. He holds several advantages. Like I said earlier, faster hands, cleaner boxing combinations, better pocket awareness, and more experience winning striking exchanges against high-level competition. And if this fight stays standing for a significant period of time, I think that striking gap is going to become very, very, very noticeable. And as the fight progresses, that damage could begin to accumulate. And that's why my prediction for this fight, I'm not going to lie, I'm going Joshua Van, Brown, 3 or 4 TKO, KO. I think that we'll see Taira attempt to establish his grappling game, looking for entries and try to create those grappling exchanges. But if Van is able to survive those early moments, defend takedowns, and keep forcing the fight back to the feet, the striking exchanges could eventually just start to favor him insanely. And as the fight goes on, I don't know if Tatsuro Taira is going to be able to take that damage. I don't think they counted it as a knockdown in the Brandon Royval fight when Brandon Royval kind of hit him. It was like I don't remember if it was a straight or an uppercut. Brandon Royval hit him with something. He kind of fell. I don't think they officially counted it as a takedown, but I think that was not a takedown, a knockdown. And I don't know, man. I think Joshua Van's boxing is better than Brandon Royval. I think he has more power than Brandon Royval. I don't see Tatsuro Taira making it out of this fight, honestly. And like I said, by those middle rounds, the damage from Van's boxing could start to add up, and it's gonna be enough to stop the fight and win him this fight. In a fight like this, there are still a lot of unknowns, so I don't really. I could see you picking Tatsuro Taira. I mean, we haven't really seen Joshua Van and how he reacts in prolonged grappling situations against a specialist like Tatsuro Taira, and we really haven't seen, Tatsuro Taira handle extended striking exchanges against someone like Joshua Van with his speed and his boxing. And I think that's exactly what makes this such a fascinating fight. We got two great young fighters in the flyweight division with two completely different styles. In a matchup like this, it could have major implications for the future of this division. I think flyweight is in a great position. It's probably the best division in the UFC right now. So, now I want to hear y'all predictions. I want to know what y'all think. Who do you think wins this fight? Do you think Tatsuro Taira his grappling will be the difference, or do you think Joshua Van's striking will take over as the fight goes on? And just let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more content.